Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're well. False start on the YouTube end of things. Apologize for that. Computer's doing a little weird things right now, as they often do, but we're all good. Gosh, bunch of stuff I want to get out of the way, and then I want to talk about the research I did all day yesterday and talk a little bit about the league. First thing, I guess, yesterday I kind of mentioned that my son got a head bang. He's actually fine. So I don't know if anybody else has ever been through this before, but it's really quite difficult. I never had the game of trying to figure out whether my kid had a concussion or not. He was training at the Utah Olympic Park and ah, took a pretty enormous fall, flew over a fence and landed and shook up and had the headache, and but seems to be all good. In fact, seems to be totally good. Kids are remarkable. If any of us took that fall, we would be out for months on end. So anyway, so I appreciate it. A few people mentioned I hope he's all right, and he's all good. So sad day in the sports world yesterday. If you're a baseball fan, Gary Carter passed. I remember Gary Carter very well because I used to play at probably 8, 9 years old. There was a game called Stratomatic Baseball, and you're gonna laugh at this hopefully. I would literally play the games, but I would take a team for a season. And I always thought the Montreal Expos underperformed how good they should be. It was Steve Rogers, the pitcher, and Warren Cromartie, and Andre Dawson, and Tim Wallach as the third baseman, and Gary Carter was the catcher on that team. And so I actually played the 162 game schedule of the Montreal Expos in one of those years. My best friend at the time was a big Red Sox fan, and he would play. But I think we weren't allowed to take our favorite teams. He played somebody else, and we actually put out a weekly newsletter with quotes and storylines and stat breakdowns. And this is on the old like TRS-80 computer. And I did that with the Montreal Expos. So I had a very close personal relationship with Gary Carter as his owner and general manager, and to see him pass away is obviously sad. But yeah, it was kind of a fun time. We used to play these games, and then we'd write these newsletters and give them to each other and keep track. And pre-internet, so you couldn't send them immediately, and pre-live video games, and really to some extent pre-good sports video games. And television wasn't out yet, so we just played board games every night. And I'd announce them and do a pre-game and halftime and post-game show. So to some extent, I guess this is what I was supposed to do. Thanks, guys. We are continuing to try to build this Locked On Jazz portal. There's a redesign coming at some point. I know I leaked that early and I made a mistake because it wasn't entirely ready yet. I didn't say when, but we're trying, and the numbers are clicking up and the reactions clicking up, and the hope here really with your guys' help is for all of us to be a nation's leader in something. I don't think any play-by-play announcer has ever done this before, where they have kind of built this 365-day year, well, something close. Don't want to overdo it, but 24/7 portal with videos and podcast, multiple podcasts and daily podcasts and story breakdowns and stats and just all the stuff we're doing. I don't think has ever been done before. I've got some visions on what the next step of expansion is for it that will hopefully make it even better. I don't want to reveal all that yet, but I can't be thankful enough for you guys going on this ride with us. And this is a collaborative effort. I mean, I'm hoping that 5, 10 years from now, we're all sitting around saying, "Gosh, remember when we all like sent our Locke Tip off questions in and did our various things that created this show." Uh, Today's edition is brought to you by Level 9 Sports. Let's get into it. There's a bunch of stuff. There seems to be some confusion, by the way, on how to send in questions to Locke Tip Off. Very easy. Via Twitter, # Locke Tip Off, and I go through those and look at them as we're doing the show. So and the questions are not coming in as heavily as they were earlier. So let's make sure we continue to bring those in. All right, a bunch of stories. I don't know if you watched the Blazers and Clippers. It was awfully late last night, but Chris Paul's really special, and it's just a great reminder of, for all these developmental issues we're trying to get our guys to improve, you got to get a special guy. You got to get a special guy. I don't know if we have. I don't know if Hayward, Cantor, Favors, or Burks is that special guy yet. Um, you know, you can have guys like Millsap who are fabulous and they bust their butt and they're great core players. But if you're going to be 19-9 like the Clippers are, they're not 19-9. Chris Paul is just really unbelievably terrific. And frankly, without Chris Paul, Blake Griffin's just not that. I mean, he has a hard time getting the ball in the post and how he's going to score. Chris Paul is just really, really, really special. The one that's interesting to me is what's going on in Chicago, where without Derrick Rose, I think they're 7-2 this year, and that really defies what I would have ever expected or thought we would see uh, from a team. That just doesn't entirely jive with how I believe things are going, and what Tom Thibodeau is doing there as a head coach needs to be really investigated, really looked at via film, because he is changing how you play defense and in some way has found a way to be able to create an environment where they win and play this electric defense at a level where without Derrick Rose they still win. It's really commendable and probably should be investigated. All right, so I did a bunch of research yesterday. What I did is I went through every single game the Jazz have played all year and looked at their plus minus depending what bigs were on the floor. I didn't really chart Jeremy Evans. I charted our four primary bigs, and I thought I found some interesting things. I want to dig into it. And a lot of it's written up on Locked On Jazz. You can check it there, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with explanations of why here. So the first thing is Jefferson and Millsap, which was not a good combination last year. It really has a major rebounding problem. Started the year very, very well, and he's actually had a good season. For the first 20 games of the season, the Jazz were plus 30 with Jefferson and Millsap on the floor together. But in only 2 of the last 11 games that they've played together have they been positive. It's in 82games.com calls it a win, like just really simple. While you're on the floor, you get a win or a loss, and they're getting losses or ties in just about every game. They only had 1 loss in their previous 12 games before this stretch, and now all of a sudden in only 2 of their last 11. So what's going on? One, Millsap has slumped. This is the period of time where Millsap has slumped, and so then that gets into the great question of why has Millsap slumped? I think there's a few issues. One, I'm not sure that they work well together. One, Al doesn't move the ball great. 2, they don't rebound together great. 3, I think Millsap has a huge burden in his game right now of trying to be an all-star, try to prove himself. And I think that 2, he's not having the ball in his hands a lot. I'm not sure he's a player who should have the ball in his hands a lot, but I think that's how he feels he should be. And so, when Al starts to go on one of his dominating stretches, I do think we see sometimes Paul being disengaged. It's worth checking. This is a really simple check, but we're seeing this weird kind of thing with Paul every now and then where he looks disengaged. I mean, I could beat around the bush and pretend it doesn't exist, but I have about 6 emails and 12 Twitter timelines, and I mean, it's clear everyone's seeing it. Tom Nasalki and Scott Gerard talked about it for the postgame show, or halftime the other night. The first thing I would check is shot attempts. Whenever you see that, go check a box score and check shot attempts. And I think there's something there where those two just don't meld very well together. When I hear these little comments out of the locker room, like, well, we got to figure out what our identity is. Sometimes I wonder if that's really almost, I don't want to put this on the guys, but sometimes I think it's almost petty. Like when they say identity, is that just simply who's getting a shot? And it depends who it's coming from, but I heard that out of the locker room the other night, and that was the reaction I had, quite honestly, is that what we're really talking about? Like identity as in how we're getting our shots, who we are, where we're going with the ball. And maybe that's, that could be very, very real. Every team goes through this. This isn't anything strange, but it isn't clear, frankly. Our go-to guy is probably Jefferson, and Paul doesn't love that because Paul had a stretch where he thinks he probably should get the ball more. Raja is a spot-up three-point shooter who has a hard time when the ball goes into Jefferson because he's not always going to get it back out. That's what was so big about that play in Memphis. And so I think there's some tough elements there. But something's happened between the Jefferson-Millsap mix, either the way teams are defending it, just they've worn each other out. Fatigue, I think, is an issue where they're not as sharp. And both of those guys aren't superior athletes. And so when they're off a little, be it fatigue or just physical beaten down, or just aware of the season, then they're not rebounding as well, then they're not defending as well, and then this group gets beat. Now, plus minus, let me clarify something. Plus minus got all sorts of problems. I mean, there's so much noise statistically to it. There's 3 other guys on the floor. There's 5 other guys on the other floor who changed. Millsap and Jefferson are playing against the best players on the other team every night. Frankly, their first quarter plus minus is not very good every night. I can look into that if you want me to. And so there's a lot there. There's a lot of noise that's taking place there that is a huge part of problem to analyzing this. The one that was most interesting to me in the research, and I missed on this too, and this is where I love numbers. It is, in my opinion, that Cantor and Favors have scuffled a little bit recently, but have generally played well together this year. And the numbers would tell you otherwise. And it really makes sense. There's no reason why that lineup should play together. And I almost think this is why I love numbers. I almost think what happened is we thought as fans that Cantor and Favors would get out there and throw up on themselves, that they'd be terrible. And they weren't terrible. They just weren't as good. They weren't great, but they weren't terrible. And so therefore we were like, oh my gosh, that's pretty good. Like, we were very impressed. They each made plays. But what we kind of lost was that every single time they were on the floor, we were losing points. And it's been season long. In the first 10 games of the year, they were minus 12 together. In the next 10 games of the year, they were minus 7. And in the last 8 games, they've been minus 14. It makes sense. Neither of them can score on their own. We really shouldn't be running the offense through either of them yet unless we're sacrificing games. And they don't entirely know how to defend or play all the way. Favors is really pretty good defensively. But it's interesting. So the first 2 takeaways here were that the Jefferson-Millsap group has, which was really good earlier together, has kind of slipped. And the Favors-Cantor group, which we thought was really good together, has had some good moments. And we kind of fell into what I call highlight-itis, that we took those highlights and just protracted that thought all the way out into believing that these guys were better together than they have been. And it's pretty eye-opening that group has really not over any extended period of time played well together. The group season long, the best group still is actually Millsap and Jefferson. They're only minus 3, and I think everybody's minus. However, when you really dig into it a little bit more recently, it still looks to me as though Tyrone Corbin was correct at the beginning of the year, and I thought so at the time, so this may be self-gratifying, that Favors and Jefferson were the 2 guys that started together, and really Favors and either Jefferson or Millsap to me seems like what the starting lineup should be. Favors didn't play along very well. They were minus 26 against the Laker game together, though in that Denver game, which was the last game, they were plus 3 together. There was other groups that fell apart. But if he goes away from the opening night minus 26, which, okay, so you're trying to help prove a point, use numbers the way you want to, Favors and Jefferson together are plus 9, and they're plus 10 really over the last 8 games. So it's recently that group has begun to play better together. They've played together in 19 games, but the problem is they don't play a lot together. In the last 8 games, when they're plus 10, they've done that over 32 minutes. The Jazz right now are really playing Jefferson and Millsap and Cantor and Favors together. Now, the Jazz as a team aren't playing as well, so when suddenly the plus minus on those 2 groups don't look as good, and those are the 2 groups that are playing together all the time, this might be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But it's probably worth delving into, using as not as the Bible, but as a piece of information when analyzing this team. I think that's got to be, I think that should be talked about in some way. Millsap and Favors have played very little together in games in which Jefferson played. So when Jefferson plays, the way the rotations work this year, Millsap and Favors have only played together in 9 games for a total of 20 minutes. However, in the 3 games Jefferson missed, they played together a lot. They were the primary group, Millsap and Favors. 26 minutes against Portland, they were plus 5. 39 minutes against Toronto, they were minus 9. But remember, most of that was in the overtime. And then 29 minutes versus Philly, they were minus 1. I don't know what that tells us other than when they've played together, they've been all right. Jefferson and Cantor have not been on the floor together much at all. And Millsap and Cantor have been on the floor and been pretty good together. They've been on the floor 12 times, 12 games this year, 75 minutes overall, and they're about even for the season. So, hey, plus minus is very limited statistically, but the breakdown tells you that, and maybe just because the team's not playing well, and if these two groups played together more, the same thing would happen. But it would beg the question of investigating whether or not there's a way you go back to Jefferson and Favors, and maybe turn Millsap and Cantor into your second unit. And I've said for a while, I don't know how Ty does this, but I kind of almost feel like it should be Jefferson and Millsap together, Favors and Cantor splitting 48 minutes. Let Jefferson and Millsap split 48 minutes, and let Jefferson and Cantor split 48 minutes. And I don't, the stats show that we're better defensively with Favors on the floor, but we're a lot less good offensively. And and I think that's just because he's not capable of carrying it when he's on the floor with uh, Cantor. Suddenly, he's the one who has to be offensive minded, and he's not totally ready there. He really is. He's ready to be a second big and give you a few offensive possessions a night. Now, also whether you build this whole team based on this, I mean, there's just don't overstate this. Take it as useful information. By the way, Jazz with Favors on the floor, defense is per 100 possessions is 103.1, and when he's off the floor, it's a 106.3. Again, lots of noise in that, but worth noting to some extent. Millsap is really continues to be our one player who has a really good plus minus. That we're positive when he's on the floor, we're positive when Earl's on the floor, and we're positive when Alex on the floor. Some of that's blowout minutes for Alex, so it's a little small. But really, those are the only three guys that we're positive right now when they're on the floor. And what's interesting is we're negative with every player on the bench except for Al Jefferson. When Al Jefferson's on the bench, we're positive as a team, which is a little bit surprising. In the This is as of February 15th, according to basketballvalue.com. So, that's the 1 year adjusted overall rating, the 1 year unadjusted offensive rating and defensive ratings. Offensively, we're most dependent on Millsap and defensively, when we have Jefferson on the floor, is the biggest negative to us. So there might be something. I mean, you start digging in, and more numbers start to begin to say the same story. There might be something to what's going on. We're a better defensive team when Favors is on the floor, when Cantor's on the floor, and then, frankly, where statistics lie, when CJ's on the floor as well. The biggest, and where statistics lie, partially because these are playing groups. It's very clear that the Millsap, Jefferson, Hayward, Harris, Bell playing group is less good defensively than the other group. Now, you got to delve into that a little bit before, again, they're playing top unit guys. They're playing first and third quarters to start. There's a lot of things there that are being said with those numbers that you have to be very careful if you decide to completely buy into. So anyway, that's the breakdown. I really never delved entirely into the huge breakdown I did this week as well on the what was I going to say? I just realized I forgot to do something. On the possession usage players below average. So we will see. A lot of tip-off questions have come in. We're at 18 minutes today, so I'm going to push those till next week probably. Apologize for that, but sometimes just the projects are what they are. So that's the work for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this tip-off. Washington Wizards are in town. This is not a great match. Jazz should win this game, but it's not a great matchup in a lot of ways because of the fact that they have very athletic guards who score a lot, and that's not always a forte of ours to stop. All right, thank you.